morning, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. You know, I understand why the Food for the Faithful channel has so few subscribers, holding now at a lamentable 260 diehards who are willing to listen to the difficult truths I have the privilege to share. The church is being confronted with an existential choice, namely, to understand the nature of the ideology that challenges the very underpinnings of Western society, or to become either increasingly marginalized or to succumb to false doctrines. But few wish to make the effort to twist their brains into a knot, attempting to figure out why our culture has succumbed to self-loathing, guilt, and mysticism, which is why I've done this for you. It merely requires that you understand a few key things about our ongoing culture war. Firstly, the culture warriors do not think like you. This may be hard for you to understand, given the fact that we have been left totally unprepared to understand their hermetic, esoteric, Gnostic thinking, since it resides outside of the purview of more traditionally minded people, or to put it bluntly, the sane among us. I assume most of you who subscribe to this channel would consider yourselves to be Christians, broadly speaking, although I realize that some of you only do so nominally. So you will need to understand that although most culture warriors say that they are atheists, that in reality, it takes a great deal of faith to acquire the secret knowledge needed to go woke. Therefore, understand that woke ideology is a hermetic mystery religion based upon secret knowledge possessed only by its initiates. This is why they view you as a troglodyte, since you are simply insufficiently enlightened and too besotted by unearned entitlement and white privilege, which to them is based purely upon who you are and where you were born, and the color of your skin. Please keep in mind that this is exactly how the Bolsheviks identified those whose property they confiscated so they could both starve and murder them. Secondly, the nature of the mystery. Gnosticism is a collection of religious ideas and systems that emerged in the late 1st century among Jewish and early Christian sects. The term Gnostic is derived from the Greek word gnostikos, which means having knowledge. Gnostics emphasize personal spiritual knowledge, or gnosos, above the orthodox teachings, traditions, and authority of religious institutions, or in the case of modern society, which descended from such. The patriarchal tyranny shot through with white privilege and colonial oppression. The Gnostic cult of woke deals not in concepts of individual sin and repentance, but with illusions, enlightenment, collective guilt based upon white privilege, or innocence grounded purely upon identifying yourself as a member of an intersectionally oppressed minority. As the liberals try to pivot, looking for a new leader with slightly less odious extremist views, I have the following thoughts. The Hegelian dialectic has made it impossible for humanity to turn mysterious madness, has made it possible, rather, for humanity to turn mysterious madness and dialectical insanity into a political system. It is the operating system of all radical leftist ideologies. Just like computers, which use Microsoft, operating a Windows platform, or MacBooks that use Mac OS, The dialectic provides the tool to create the gnosis needed to understand the left. Dialectical synthesis is its software, allowing the operating system of woke radicalism to perform its various functions. Which is why the Liberal Party of Canada obtaining a new party leader cannot possibly fix a system which is based on Hegelian dialectics, or to function in any other way than the dialectic allows it to function. It'll take an exorcism to cast the spirit of Hegel out of the LPC. This is the reason most of us look on in astonishment as the Liberals pursue policies we simply cannot fathom. Dialectical analysis causes radicals to examine the world to understand its infinite complexities using reductionist tools that oversimplifies life. This is why they so often assign similar solutions to radically different problems. Foremost is the belief that humans are born tabula rasa, innocent blank slates who can be socially engineered to conform to their ideas of socialized perfection. Unless, of course, you're white and middle class, then you're just reprehensible. Since these beliefs are based upon an essential misunderstanding of human nature, the forced process of socializing is always authoritarian and collectivist in nature. I recently had some who identify as right-wing attempt to argue that it is not necessary to understand how the nature of the dialectic operates in order to counter it. To me, this is as uninformed as stating that physicians do not need to study disease in order to treat illnesses. But let us read what a defected communist had to tell us about the use of such polemics to justify ignorance. The following is from Big Think at the following link, and I provide it for you, in an article entitled 39 Years Ago, a KGB Defector Chillingly Predicted Modern America. A disturbing interview given by KGB defector in 1984 describes America of today and outlines 4 stages of mass brainwashing used by the KGB. Also unclear were the group's long-term plans involving the U.S. One glimpse, however, comes from a former KGB agent named Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, who defected to Canada in 1970. He claimed to know no details of a Soviet plan to undermine the U.S., not on the battlefront, but in the psyche of American public life. In 1984, Bezmenov gave an interview to J. Edward Griffin, from which much can be learned today. His most chilling point was that there is a long-term plan put in play by Russia to defeat America through psychological warfare and demoralization. It's a long game that takes decades to achieve, but it may already be bearing fruit. Bezmenov made the point that the work of the KGB mainly does not involve espionage, despite what our popular culture may tell us. Most of the work, 85% of it, was a slow process, which we call either ideological subversion, active measures, or psychological warfare. What does that mean? Bezmenov explained that the most striking thing about ideological subversion is that it happens in the open as a legitimate process. You can see it with your own eyes, he said. The American media would be able to see it if it just focused on it. Here's how he further defined ideological subversion. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. Bezmenov described this process as a great brainwashing that has 4 basic stages. The first stage is called demoralization, which takes from 15 to 20 years to achieve. According to the former KGB agent, that is the minimum number of years it takes to re-educate one generation of students that is normally exposed to the ideology of its country. In other words, it takes the time it takes to change what the people are thinking. He used the examples of 1960s hippies coming to positions of power in the 1980s in the government and businesses of America. Bezmenov claimed this generation was already contaminated by Marxist-Leninist values. Of course, this claim that many baby boomers are somehow espousing KGB-tainting ideas is hard to believe. But Bezmenov's larger point addresses why people who have been gradually demoralized are unable to understand that this has happened to them. Referring to such people, Bezmenov said, they are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a pattern, alluding to Pavlov. You cannot change their mind even if you expose them to authentic information. Even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. Demoralization is a process which is irreversible. Bezmenov actually thought back in 1984 that the process of demoralizing America was already completed. It would take another generation and another couple of decades to get the people to think differently and return to their patriotic American values, claimed the agent. In what is perhaps a most striking passage in the interview, here's how Bezmenov described the state of a demoralized person. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore, said Bezmenov. A person who is demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him a concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he receives a kick in his fan bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization. It's hard not to see in that the state of many modern Americans. We have become a society of polarized tribes, with some people flat out rejecting facts in favor of narratives and opinions. Once demoralization is completed, the second state of ideological brainwashing is destabilization. During this 2 to 5 year period, asserted Bezmenov, what matters is the target of essential structural elements of a nation: economy, foreign relations, and defense systems. Basically, the subverter Russia would look to destabilize every one of those areas in the United States, considerably weakening it. I would suggest that that's exactly what happened during the COVID pandemic. The third stage would be crisis. It would take only up to 6 weeks to send a country into crisis, explained Bezmenov. This crisis would bring a violent change of power, structure, and economy. And it will be followed by the last stage, normalization. That's when your country is basically taken over, living under a new ideology and reality. This will happen to America unless it gets rid of people who will bring it to a crisis, warns Bezmenov. What's more, if people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing can ever help the United States, adding, you may kiss goodbye to your freedom. It bears saying, when he made these statements, he was warning about baby boomers and Democrats of the time. I don't know why Republicans aren't included in that. In another somewhat terrifying excerpt, here's what Bezmenov had to say, what's really happening in the United States. It may think it is living in peace, but it has been actively at war with Russia and for some time. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational systems trains another generation of people who think they are living at the peacetime, said the former KGB agent. False. The United States is in a state of war and declared total war against the basic principles and foundation of this system. And you can watch the full interview with Bezmenov at the link I provide to see him on YouTube. So here is my summating thoughts. Near the end of World War II, famed psychoanalyst Carl Jung predicted that the biggest threat that would confront mankind in the future would be mass psychological instability rather than material want and privation. He recognized that this outcome had become inevitable because of a new class of ideologically possessed nihilists who had used dialectical analysis to justify the creation of fantasies based upon the synthesis of mutually exclusive propositions, which would lead Trudeau's ridiculous epithet of humanity known as peoplekind to reject reality for living in delusional totalitarian ideation. I'd say we are fast approaching the moment Jung so presciently predicted, since Canada is currently being governed by its own national bird, Trudeau the Loon, whose entire premiership has been built on ideological fabrications and pure fantasia. His party's fundamental success has been in changing the perception of reality so that no one will be able to come to sensible conclusions, just as Yuri Bezmenov and Carl Jung warned us was inevitable if this toxic, culture-destroying ideology is not stopped dead in its tracks. Demoralization is the process by which neo-Marxists have taken their long march through the institutions, where Trudeau is the current band leader, shuffling the deck chairs of Parliament as the good ship HMS Canada Titanic sinks into economic and cultural ruin, while Justin waves his imaginary baton, constructed of simulacra, while atonally conducting a tone-deaf orchestra of cultural revolutionaries whose sole achievement will have been to destroy the very institutions they are currently inhabiting. These are things to think and pray about on this November the 4th, Saturday morning. God bless you all. Please leave your comments and your remarks. Share this podcast and blog and join the discussion. Do you agree with me that we need to understand the nature of our own ideological possession? I don't see how else we can counter this pathogenic illness of woke that operates like a mind worm. Cheers.